All right, everyone. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for attending this important training today. My name is Stephanie Loop, and we're going to be talking about a lot. We're going to be speaking on streamlining requirements and improving program integrity in the summer food service program, which was a final rule that has recently gone through, as well as the implementation guidance that was issued by USDA on non-congregate feeding options available in 2023. So for today, the first hour or so, we're going to focus on the new final rule. We're going to allow, if time is permitting, we may allow for a 5-minute intermission, and then we're going to continue with USDA guidance for implementing non-congregate summer feeding in the second hour of this training. This recording and slide deck will be sent to Louisiana Fit Kids within approximately 48 hours for posting. I will note that the returning sponsor training for SFSP that we had scheduled for Thursday the 23rd is being rescheduled. Just due to the volume of changes for the summer and recent USDA guidance, we need to reschedule for Tuesday, March 28th from 1 to 3:30. So if you were scheduled for this Thursday, the 23rd, please go ahead and go back to Louisiana Fit Kids and register for our Tuesday, March 28th training. It will be recorded and posted as we always do. So if you're unable to make that time, you'll be able to view it at a later date. Okay, so like I said, in the first half of this training, we're going to discuss the final rule. Now, the final rule has 24 parts, and we're going to cover just those that are applicable to program operations for this upcoming summer. So the final rule, this rulemaking amends the summer food service program regulations to strengthen program integrity by clarifying, simplifying, and streamlining program administration to facilitate compliance with program requirements. Through this final rule, USDA is codifying changes to the regulations that will streamline requirements among child nutrition programs, simplify the application process, enhance monitoring requirements, offer more clarity on existing requirements, and provide more discretion at the state agency level to manage program operations. The final rule portion of this training will follow the same pattern for each new rule. First, we will take a look at the previous regulations. Next, we will take a look at previous waivers or guidance issued by USDA. And then we will look at what the new rule says and cover the implications for program operators in the state of Louisiana. So our first rule is about the first week site visit. Previous regulations required sponsors to visit each site at least once during the first week of operation in the program. It required sponsors to conduct a review of the food service at each site during the first 4 weeks of program operations. Through current and previous guidance and waivers, flexibility was provided through memos for sponsors to not conduct the first week site visit if sites operated successfully in the previous year or the sponsor was in good standing in the CACFP or NSLP, and this was through waiver options. There's several new regulations related to this visit. First, the visit may occur during the first 2 weeks of operation for new sites. New sites are any first-time sites, sites that operated under a different sponsor in 2022, or sites that last operated in a year prior to 2022. This rule expands required visits to also include sites with operational problems in the prior year. And again, prior year meaning they operated in 2022. All visits must be conducted during this time period, during the time period that the site is operating, or prior to the close of site operations, if it's less than 2 weeks. The state agency must make a determination on criteria for operational problems. These criteria will be listed on the online application. You'll be able to assess each site as a new or returning, and with or without operational weaknesses. Serious deficiencies, missing meal components, inadequate quantities, Significant lack of training and other similar criteria will require a site visit in the first 2 weeks of operation. And lastly, the food service review, the visit during the first 4 weeks of operation, now may occur at the same time as the site visit. So what does this rule mean for you? If your site operated in a year prior to 2022, it will need to be treated like a new site. If the site operated under a different sponsor in 2022, it will need to be treated like a new site. If your site had operational weaknesses, as described in the online application, the site will require a site visit within the first 2 weeks of operation. For sites that operate for a week or less, the site visit must be conducted during the period of operation. And lastly, the meal service review is still due within the first 4 weeks of operation. However, you may conduct both the site visit, which is the first 2-week form, and the food service review during the same visit. And I will make a note here that USDA has not updated the template. It is still called the first week site visit, and you can certainly do it within the first week, but just know that it can be conducted within the first 2 weeks of operation. All right, next we will discuss changes to offer versus serve. Previous regulations allowed school food authorities to operate offer versus serve, a provision allowing a child to refuse one or more items that the child does not intend to eat. Through previous policy guidance in SP 10 and SFSP 06/2017, meal service requirements in the summer meal programs with questions and answers, FNS extended the option to use offer versus serve at all sites, regardless of location or type of sponsorship, and allowed SFA sponsors electing to use the SFSP meal pattern to use SFSP OVS guidelines. That guidance was rescinded in 2018. Since that time, FNS approved waivers of offer versus serve requirements through individual and COVID-related nationwide waivers. Most recently, the nationwide waiver to allow offer versus serve flexibilities in the summer food service program for summer 2021, and that even went through a third extension. Updated regulations maintain that only school food authorities may utilize the offer versus serve option in the SFSP. It does allow for SFA sponsors to elect to use the SFSP meal pattern and offer versus serve guidance. So what does this mean for you? Only school food authorities will be allowed to implement offer versus serve. If you are a private nonprofit, church, community organization, government, or tribal organization, you will not be permitted to use offer versus serve. You will be required to both offer all meal components and ensure that children accept all food components in the SFSP meal pattern. Children do not have to consume each item, but they must have them on their plate or tray in order for it to be considered a reimbursable meal. This includes milk and both items in the fruit and vegetable component at lunch and supper. Next, we'll take a look at meal service time changes. Previous regulations restricted meal service times in the SFSP. 3 hours were required to elapse between the beginning of one meal service, including snacks, and the beginning of another, with the exception that 4 hours must have lapsed between the service of a lunch and a supper when no snack was served between lunch and supper. The service of supper could not begin later than 7 p.m. unless the state agency granted a waiver of this requirement due to extenuating circumstances. However, in no case could the service of supper extend beyond 8 p.m. The duration of the meal service was limited to 2 hours for lunch or supper and for 1 hour for all other meals. And these restrictions did not apply to residential camps. Through previous policy guidance in SFSP 11/2011, waiver of mealtime restrictions and unitized meal requirements in the summer food service program, FNS waived all meal service time restrictions. That guidance was rescinded in 2018. Since that time, FNS has approved waivers of meal service time requirements through individual and COVID-related nationwide waivers, most recently through the nationwide waiver of meal service time restrictions for summer 2022, and that was extended 4 times. New regulations remove all existing meal service time restrictions. Meals claimed at breakfast, must be served at or close to the beginning of the day, and they cannot be served after a lunch or a supper. The new regulations also require that all sites, except for residential camps, have a minimum of 1 hour elapsed between the end of one meal service and the beginning of another. It also adds that the state agency may approve for reimbursement of meals served outside of the approved meal service times if there are unanticipated events outside of the sponsor's control, such as power outages or other emergencies. What does this one mean for you? Sites must serve breakfast at the beginning of the day and before lunch or supper. A minimum of 1 hour must elapse between the end of one meal service and the beginning of another. Meal service must always occur within the meal times indicated on the online application. Deviations from the approved schedule must be approved prior to meal service in order to be claimed. Please always call the state agency if an emergency occurs requiring a change in the meal service time. Our number is 225-342-9661. The previous definition of a closed enrolled site required that 50% of the enrolled children at the site were eligible for free or reduced price meals under the NSLP and SBP. Through previous guidance in the Summer Food Service Program waiver for closed enrolled sites, FNS waived the requirements in the definition of closed enrolled site that required collection of income eligibility forms to determine site eligibility. This allowed sites to establish eligibility based on community data. That guidance was rescinded in 2018. Since that time, FNS waived area eligibility requirements for closed enrolled sites through individual and COVID-related nationwide waivers, most recently through the nationwide waiver to allow area eligibility for closed enrolled sites for summer 2022 operations. New regulations amend the definition of areas in which poor economic conditions exist and closed enrolled sites to clarify eligibility requirements and include eligibility determinations based on area data, which can include school or census data. The new regulations also require the state agency to establish criteria for approved closed enrolled sites to ensure that operation of a site as a closed enrolled site does not limit program access in the area that the site is located. It also reestablishes the frequency at which sites must recertify their eligibility. If based on area data, this reestablishment must take place every 5 years. So what will this one mean for you? The state agency will have certain limits on approving closed enrolled sites to ensure operation of a site as closed enrolled doesn't limit program access in the area that the site is located. If at all possible, consider making your site restricted open in order to accommodate the community if you have any concerns about safety, security, or capacity. The CNP online application will be able to determine what sites in your area may make your site area eligible. The CNP online application will also automatically lock in area eligibility data for you for 5 years from the time of established eligibility. Next, we will discuss performance standards for evaluating sponsor viability, capability, and accountability. Previous regulations required sponsors applying to participate in the SFSP to demonstrate financial and administrative capability for program operations. CACFP regulations include performance standards that assist state agencies in assessing an applicant's financial viability and financial management, administrative capability, and accountability. There was no other previous guidance or waivers associated with this topic. New regulations include great focus in the area of sponsor viability, capability, and accountability. We're going to refer to this as VCA. State agencies now have new standards for assessing a prospective new sponsor's VCA and clarifies the contents of the required management plan. Management plans are now codified in regulations. These management plans must be submitted and demonstrate sponsor compliance with performance standards. New sponsors and sponsors with significant operational problems must submit a complete management plan that demonstrates compliance with performance standards found in 7 CFR 225.6D. Further, Experienced sponsors must submit a full or simplified management plan at the discretion of the state agency. A full management plan must be submitted at least once every 3 years. The simplified management plan must include a certification that information previously submitted to the state agency to satisfy eligibility requirements is current. What do these new regulations mean for you? New sponsors will go through a rigorous VCA process in compliance with regulations in order to be eligible for participation. The online application has a management plan section. It's 3 pages in length, and that has been added to the sponsor application. More in-depth management plans can and may be required at the state agency's discretion. Next, we have application procedures for new sponsors. Previous regulations outline specific requirements for sponsors and sites applying to participate in the SFSP. The requirements for experienced SFSP sponsors at 225.6C3 are more streamlined than the requirements for new sponsors and sponsors that have experienced significant operational problems in previous years. Policy guidance in SFSP 05-2012, simplifying application procedures in the Summer Food Service Program, and SFSP 04-2013, summer feeding options for school food authorities, allowed SFAs and CACFP institutions in good standing applying for participation in the SFSP at the same sites where they operate a meal service during the school year, the flexibility of using the experienced sponsor application procedures. New regulations in the final rule codify the flexibility for SFAs and CACFP institutions that are in good standing applying to the SFSP as new sponsors to use the application procedures for experienced sponsors at the discretion of the state agency. This will only affect prospective new SFSP sponsors who are current CACFP or NSLP sponsors. They will have a simplified process to come on as SFSP sponsors. Now let's take a look at the changes to demonstration of financial and administrative capability. Previous regulations required sponsors applying to participate in the program to demonstrate financial and administrative capability for program operations and accept financial responsibility for total program operations and accept at all sites which they proposed to conduct food service. Policy guidance in SFSP 05-2012, simplifying application procedures in the Summer Food Service Program, and SFSP 04-2013, summer feeding options for school food authorities, provided that SFAs and CACFP institutions in good standing applying to participate in the SFSP were not required to submit further evidence of financial and administrative capability. New regulations include the flexibility previously outlined in guidance that SFAs and CACFP institutions in good standing applying to operate the SFSP do not have to provide further evidence of financial and administrative capabilities. However, state agencies may request a management plan or additional evidence of financial and administrative capabilities if they have reason to believe that financial or administrative capability would pose significant challenges for an applicant sponsor. So what does this mean for you? There may be situations in which a detailed management plan and or VCA assessment is conducted with existing sponsors. Next, we will look at meal claim validation. Previous regulations required that states conducting a sponsor review must review at least 10% of the sponsor's sites or one site, whichever number is greater. USDA guidance in the Summer Food Service Program State Agency Monitoring Guide from 2017 instructed state agencies to validate meal claims for all claiming sites in the review month for a sponsor that was being reviewed. New regulations describe a detailed multi-step approach to site-based meal claim validation. State agencies would initially validate a small sample of claims, 10% of each reviewed sponsor sites, or one site, whichever number is greater, and would only be required to validate additional claims if they detect 5% error rates or more at each step. State agencies retain the option to complete a complete meal claim validation in lieu of the multi-step approach. What does this mean for you? During summer reviews, the meal claims data claim consolidation will most likely take a tiered approach depending on findings. The more findings discovered, which the threshold is 5% at each step, the more claims the state will be required to consolidate. Statistical monitoring procedures and site selection for site reviews. Previous regulations at 7 CFR 225.7 D8 gave states the option to use statistical monitoring procedures in lieu of the site monitoring requirements. Site selection criteria for conducting reviews were not addressed in the regulations. There was no previous guidance or waivers associated with site selection for reviews. New regulations require site monitoring requirements. Sites selected for review must be based on criteria. To the maximum extent possible, selected sites should reflect the sponsor's entire population of sites. Characteristics that should be reflected are listed on the next slide. So here are the characteristics that should be reflected in the sites selected for review. A, the maximum number of meals approved to serve under 7 CFR 225.6 H1 and 2. B, the method of obtaining meals, such as self-preparation or vended meal service. C, the time since the last site review by the state agency. D, the type of site. Is it open, closed, enrolled? Is it a camp? E, the type of physical location. Is it in a school, an outdoor area, or a community center? F, their rural designation. And we will discuss rural in more depth later on in this presentation. And G, affiliation with the sponsor as defined in 225.2. Next are the changes to establishing the initial maximum approved level of meals for sites of vended sponsors. This is talking about site caps. Previous regulations required that when approving a site application, the state agency must establish for each meal service an approved level for the maximum number of children's meals which may be served under the program, which is the site cap. Previous guidance from SFSP 16-2015, site caps in the summer food service program, clarified that sponsors may request an increase to existing site caps at any time prior to the submission of the meal claims forms for reimbursement that includes meals served in excess of that site cap. New regulations clarify that sponsors of vended meal sites may request an adjustment to the maximum approved level of meal service anytime prior to submitting a claim for reimbursement. The term request is used to clarify that states have discretion on whether or not to approve site cap adjustments. This is what 7 CFR 225.6 H2I states. The initial maximum approved level must be based upon the historical record of attendance at the site, if such a record has been established in prior years, and the state agency determines that it is accurate. The state agency must develop a procedure for establishing initial maximum approved levels for sites when no accurate record from prior years is available. The state agency may consider participation at other similar sites located in the area, documentation of programming taking place at the site, statistics on the number of children residing in the area, and other relevant information. Sponsors may request an increase to the approved ADP anytime prior to submitting the claim. However, the state agency has discretion to approve or decline the request. Please remember that site adjustments will be reviewed by the state agency and prior approval through the site visit may be required. The state agency will use prior year validated data to help establish site caps in vended sites. Next, we're going to talk about meals served away from approved locations. Previous regulations, as defined at 225.2, a site is a physical location at which a sponsor provides food service for children and at which children consume meals in a supervised setting. Current and previous guidance and waivers found in FNS Instruction 788-13, subsites in the Summer Food Service Program, stated that meals are reimbursable only when served at sites which have been approved by the administering agency and granted state agencies the flexibility to approve exceptions to this requirement for the operation of a field trip. Field trips in the Summer Food Service Program from February 3rd of 2003 clarified that formal approval of the alternative meals service is not a federal requirement. Whenever sponsors plan field trips that may affect the time or location of meal service, the state should be informed. New regulations allow sponsors to claim reimbursement for only meals specified in the state sponsor agreement at an approved site, unless certain requirements are met for meals served away from approved locations. Here are the requirements. Number 1, the sponsor notifies the state agency in advance that meals will be served away from the approved site. Number 2, the state agency has determined that all program requirements in 225.16G will be met, including applicable state and local health, safety, and sanitation standards. Number 3, the meals are served at the approved meal service time, unless a change is approved by the state agency. And number 4, sponsors of open sites continue operating at the approved location. If not possible, the state agency may permit an open site to close, in which case the sponsor must notify the community of the change in meal service and provide information about alternative open sites. The state agency may determine that meals served away from the approved site location are not reimbursable if the sponsor did not provide notification in advance of the meal service. The state agency may establish guidelines for the amount of advance notice needed. So in order to accommodate this new regulation, LDOE has created a JOT form for submission of field trip or meals away requests. If the sponsor wants to claim reimbursable meals on field trips, prior approval is required. The form should be submitted for approval 2 weeks prior to the field trip for approval. Without prior approval, the sponsor will not be allowed to claim the meals served on the field trip. Please note too that open sites are required to stay open at the normal site and time as on the approved application. In regards to timelines for reimbursements to sponsors, previous regulations required state agencies to forward reimbursements to sponsors within 45 days of receiving a valid claim. The regulations also required that if a sponsor submitted a claim for reimbursement that was incomplete or invalid, the state agency would have to return the claim to the sponsor within 30 days, calendar days, with an explanation of the reason for disapproval. If the sponsor submitted a complete revised claim, the state agency would have to take final action within 45 calendar days of receipt. 225.9D10 provided state agencies the ability to use evidence found in audits, reviews, or investigations as the basis for non-payment of a claim for reimbursement. There was no other guidance on this topic. New regulations indicate that if a claim is determined to be potentially unlawful based on 225.9D10, the state agency must still disapprove the claim within 30 calendar days with an explanation of the reason for disapproval and how the claim must be revised for payment. It also specifies that the state agency must notify the sponsor of its right under 225.13A to appeal a denied claim. This rule also amends 225.9D10 to clarify that a state agency may be exempt from the 45 calendar day timeframe for for final action if more time is needed to complete a thorough examination of the sponsor's claim. It also clarifies that a state agency must provide notification to the FNS regional office that it is taking the exemption to the 45 calendar day timeframe at the same time as the sponsor's claim is disapproved. What does this mean for you? The state agency may deny claims when there is a concern over the lawfulness of the claim. Appeal rights will be provided. And the state agency may delay the claiming process if or when there is more investigation needed. For annual verification of tax-exempt status, previous regulations required sponsors to be public or private nonprofit organizations in order to participate in the program. Policy guidance in SFSP 04-2017, automatic revocation of tax-exempt status, provided guidance for confirming sponsors' tax-exempt status, which required that state agencies annually review sponsors' tax-exempt status. The memorandum was first published in response to a 2011 change in filing requirements for some tax-exempt organizations by the IRS, as failure to comply with the new requirements could result in the automatic revocation of an organization's tax-exempt status. New requirements amended 225.14b5 to codify the requirements for annual confirmation of tax-exempt status of private nonprofit sponsoring organizations at the time of application. The state agency currently conducts reviews of tax-exempt status annually, so this rule results in no change for you. Regulations at 225.2 define self-preparation sponsor as a sponsor which prepared the meals that would be served at its site or sites and did not contract with a food service management company for unitized meals with or without milk or for management services. 225.2 defined vended sponsor as a sponsor which purchased from a food service management company the unitized meals with or without milk, which it served at its site or sites, or a sponsor which purchased management services subject to the limitations set forth in 225.15 from a food service management company. New regulations add the following definitions for vended and self-prep site meals. A vended site means a site that serves unitized meals with or without milk that were procured through a formal agreement or contract with A, public agencies or entities such as a school food authority, B, private nonprofit organizations, or C, private for-profit companies such as commercial food service distributors or food service management companies. Self-preparation site means a site that prepares the majority of meals that will be served at its site or receives meals that are prepared at its sponsor's central kitchen. The site does not contract with a food service management company for unitized meals with or without milk or for management services. New regulations also retain the sponsor level definitions and amend regulations to require sponsors to provide a summary of how meals will be obtained at each site rather than at the sponsor level as part of the sponsor application. Be expecting quite a few changes to the online application at both the sponsor and site levels related to this and other areas covered in the final rule and non-congregate feeding option. Roles and responsibilities of site supervisors. This is a pretty big change. It's related to the roles and responsibilities of site supervisors. Previous regulations did not address this issue. Responsibilities of site supervisors are outlined throughout program guidance, including the administration guide for sponsors and the site supervisor's guide, and through technical assistance. New regulations add the definition of a site supervisor, which is the individual on site for the duration of the meal service who has been trained by the sponsor and is responsible for all administrative and management activities at the site, including but not limited to maintaining documentation of meal deliveries, ensuring that all meals served are safe, and maintaining accurate point of service meal counts. How will this impact you? The state agency will be unable to approve applications where site supervisors are responsible for multiple sites operating the same meals at the same times or dates. Site supervisors will have to be dedicated employees at individual sites. Please pay close attention to the individuals you assign as site supervisors. They will need to be on site for the duration of meal service, and they need to be the one who has been trained by the sponsor and is responsible for all administrative and management activities at the site, including but not limited to maintaining documentation of meal deliveries, ensuring that all meals served are safe, and maintaining accurate point of service meal counts. We can't emphasize enough how important this role is. Please carefully consider who you assign as the site supervisor at each site. Staff will be carefully reviewing this during the online application period and will be checking on this on technical assistance, drop-in visits, and monitoring reviews. Previous regulations did not define unanticipated school closures. However, policy guidance in SP 04, CACFP 03, SFSP 03 2020 meal service during unanticipated school closures provided guidance on operating SFSP during unanticipated school closures. New regulations add a definition of unanticipated school closure that aligns with statutory requirements and current regulatory language. Any period from October through April, or any time of the year in an area with a continuous school calendar, during which children who are not in school due to a natural disaster, building repair, court order, labor management disputes, or when approved by the state agency, similar cause, may be served meals at non-school sites through the summer food service program. This means that during the months of October through April, if there is some form of unanticipated school closure that meets the definition and regulations as discussed on the previous slide, you could potentially be eligible to operate the SFSP at non-school sites. The next set of regulation changes in the final rule revolve around the nonprofit food service account, and net cash resources. Previous regulations did not include definitions for these terms. They were, however, defined in 7 CFR 210, which are the National School Lunch Program regulations. There was no other guidance on the matter for summer food service programs. New regulations define these terms. Regulations add to 225.2 a definition of nonprofit food service account. The restricted account, in which all of the revenue from all food service operations conducted by the sponsor principally for the benefit of children, is retained and used only for the operation or improvement of the nonprofit food service. This account must include, as appropriate, non-federal funds used to support program operations and proceeds from non-program foods. The definition of net cash resources is all monies as determined in accordance with the state agency's established accounting system that are available to or have accrued to a sponsor's nonprofit food service at any given time, less cash payable. Such monies may include, but are not limited to, cash on hand, cash receivable, earnings on investments, cash on deposit, and the value of stocks, bonds, or other negotiable securities. The definition of nonprofit food service is defined as all food service operations conducted by the sponsor, principally for the benefit of children, all of the revenue from which is used solely for the operation or improvement of such food services. In order to comply with regulations, The online application will require sponsors to attest that they have a nonprofit food service account and that the sponsor has the means to keep funds separate for the sole purpose of child nutrition programs. The next aspect of the final rule is related to meal quality facility reviews. Previous regulations required that part of any review of a vended sponsor must include a food service management company facility visit. There was no other guidance on the topic. New regulations include information on food service management company facility visits previously included in other regulations. These regulations clarify that facility reviews are part of a vended sponsor's review. The facility review must be conducted at least one time within the appropriate review cycle for each vended sponsor, and that in the instance where multiple sponsors use the same food service management company, then a single facility review will satisfy those review requirements for those vended sponsors. The state agency must respond promptly to complaints concerning facilities and not reimburse for meals if the facility does not correct violations noted by the state agency. For this summer, vended kitchen reviews will be included as part of the summer review unless it was done as part of an administrative review during the school year. The review will take place during the review period. The state agency will continue to respond to complaints concerning facilities and deny reimbursement for issues that are uncorrected by the vended or FSMC facility. This actually concludes the first half of our presentation, and I will take a few questions here before we dive into implementing non-congregate feeding in summer of 2023. So we do have a few questions about some of the differences between SSO and SFSP, and I will say there is a different first week monitoring visit, or now it's a 2-week monitoring visit. That form is different than any monitoring that will be conducted in SSO. So these specific requirements are specifically related to the summer food service program, which is separate from SSO. This PowerPoint will be sent over to Louisiana Fit Kids within 48 hours. So it will be available there. We have a question about if site supervisors can be employees of the food service management company. And what I would say to that, I may need to do a little bit more research, but my thought is that it should be the person who is responsible for the activities that are occurring at that site. So whoever is going to be on site and is going to be working with documentation and point of service, I believe that that is the person who should be designated as the site supervisor. But again, I will try to get clarity on that. There's a question about, is the new VCA process for current school food authorities? No, at this point, it is not. Currently, the new VCA process is going to be for new sponsors coming onto the program, but there probably will be things that occur in future years related to VCA with existing sponsors. Is a management plan required for returning sponsors? For this summer, the management plan is incorporated into the sponsor application. And so that is, at this point, all you will have to fill out. If you're a returning sponsor, you will just fill out the 3 pages of the sponsor application that are titled management plan. We do not have much new guidance related to SSO for this summer yet. Most of it's related to SFSP. Hannah, send us a question about if the SSO will be granted a waiver for age grade groups. Please send us an email about that question. I have a question. Is it true that our site supervisors can only manage one site? Usually our site supervisors manage several sites from one location. So it is our understanding that, well, it's stated in regulations at this point that the site supervisor must be on site for the duration of meal service. So unfortunately, if a site supervisor is not going to be on site for one or both meals for the duration of the meal service at a site, they will only be able to be assigned to one site, and you will have to find other site supervisors for other locations. And this is directly, it's in regulation at this point. So we will not be able to approve. Now, if you've got one site that's only operating breakfast and another site that's only operating lunch, it would be possible to utilize the same individual. But if you've got two sites simultaneously operating meal service, they will have to be assigned to one or the other. I'll give one more minute for questions on this part. We have a question about, is there another title that could be used, like area managers? SFSP regulations do require that a site supervisor be assigned to each site. Now, I could foresee area managers having a role on the sponsor application, like monitor, area manager / monitor, and they could be assigned to multiple locations. But in terms of the site application and site logistics, there will have to be a dedicated site supervisor at each location. And for school systems, yes, I would think that whoever is currently the manager would probably be the site supervisor. I think that would be a safe assumption. Okay, I'm going to pause for one more minute to see if any other questions come in. And I think instead of taking a break, we will just continue on into our next section. This PowerPoint will be posted to Louisiana Fit Kids. It will be sent within 48 hours, both the recording and the actual slide deck with the annotations or with the speaking notes. All right. All right, so now we're going to dive into the second half of our presentation, and we're a little ahead of where I thought we would be, so that's great. Hopefully I won't have to keep you all until 3 p.m. But I know this is going to be also a lot of new information. This is also going to be a lot of new information, and there's a lot to it. There's a lot of moving parts, but we're going to provide you with the guidance that we've received so far. And hopefully this can help you start thinking ahead and planning on, number one, if you're going to be eligible for non-congregate feeding, and number two, some of the ways that that is going to look. All right. So on December 29th of 2022, President Biden signed the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023. The act included significant policy changes for child nutrition programming, including the authorization of a permanent non-congregate meal service through the Summer Food Service Program and National School Lunch Program Seamless Summer Option. And this is specifically for rural areas with no congregate meal service and the Summer Electronic Benefits Transfer for Children program. The non-congregate model for rural areas is available in summer 2023, and Summer EBT for children program will be available in summer of 2024. The Act requires FNS to promulgate regulations to carry out these two changes. Regulations for these policy changes will be promulgated in advance of summer 2024. So currently for this summer, we are operating on a very basic framework of rules, but there will be more rules and more guidance that come out for next summer. To help pay for a permanent non-congregate summer meals option and summer EBT benefit, the bill does unfortunately curtail two temporary pandemic supports. It reduces pandemic EBT benefits for summer of 2023, and it ends SNAP emergency allotments after February of 2023. The summary includes more details on the provisions. Based on legislation, the following supports will be available. For summer 23, pandemic EBT remains available in states that have approved plans, which Louisiana does. The requirement to have an approved 2022-2023 plan has been removed, and the benefit level has been lowered to $120 max total for the summer. So that is significantly lower. Non-congregate summer meals will be an option in rural areas without congregate sites using guidelines and models that USDA developed for earlier demonstration projects like Meals to You. States that want to offer the option this summer must submit a plan by April 1st. This is a plan that we submit annually. It's called the MAP, and we are currently working on having that plan submitted to USDA to our regional office by April 1st. For summer 2024 and beyond, summer EBT will be available nationwide to all children eligible for free or reduced price school meals based on regulations to be issued by USDA sometime in 2023. States must opt in, submit a plan by February 15th, and pay half of the administrative cost. Non-congregate summer meals will be an option in rural areas without congregate service, available based on regulations to be issued by USDA sometime in 2023. States must opt in and submit a plan by February 15th that details how they will identify and target areas with gaps. Implementation guidance titled Memo SFSP 01-2023 and SP 05-2023 were released on February 28th of 2023, and this memo has been posted to our CNP website. There's two main criteria: that the site is in a rural area, and this is determined by USDA's rural designation map, and that no congregate feeding sites are available in the area. We're going to review the questions covered in the implementation guidance. These are broken down into a few main areas: state agency approval, sponsor site and participant eligibility, service models, meal service, and then some general topics. Sponsors can provide non-congregate summer meals in rural areas that do not have congregate meal service. If the rural area meets the definition of an area in which poor economic conditions exist per program regulations at 7 CFR 225.2, then meals for all children may be claimed for reimbursement. If the rural area does not meet the definition of an area in which poor economic conditions exist, only the meals offered to children who are eligible for free or reduced price meals under the National School Lunch Program or the School Breakfast Program may be claimed. Can SFAs operating SSO provide non-congregate meal service? Yes. SFAs operating the NSLP Seamless Summer Option, or SSO, may provide non-congregate meal service as described in this guidance. Non-congregate meals served under the SSO are reimbursed at the free rates prescribed by the Department of Agriculture for school meals and snacks served through the NSLP and SBP. If suppers are provided, they would have to be reimbursed at the NSLP free rate for lunches. States should continue designating rural areas as they have in prior summers. These designations now apply to both congregate and non-congregate meal service operations. FNS developed the rural designation map to assist state agencies and sponsors in designating sites as rural. Instructions for using the map are available on the map link at fns.usda.gov/rural designation. This is the map that the Louisiana Department of Education uses each year to make rural determinations on online applications. Therefore, the state agency will continue to use this map in summer of 2023. Here is a list of the parishes that are eligible for non-congregate feeding according to the USDA SFSP rural designation map. Again, since this map has been the basis for all rural and non-rural determinations in prior years in Louisiana, it will be used this summer for rural determinations. As you can see, there are 28 parishes that fall into the category of rural. Can non-congregate meals be provided in non-rural areas if program access is limited because of lack of transportation, safety concerns, lack of a location to serve meals, or other similar reasons? No. Non-congregate meal service is only allowed in rural areas where no congregate meal service is available. State agencies and sponsors should work together to determine how to best leverage community resources to provide a congregate meal service that meets the needs of children in non-rural areas. How should state agencies identify whether an area has no congregate meal service for the purpose of determining non-congregate meal service? State agencies have the discretion to determine whether an area has no congregate meal service. The state agency must ensure that the area the site proposes to serve is not or will not be served by a congregate meal service consistent with the requirements at 7 CFR 225.6 H12. Sorry for these pauses. My throat keep getting choked up a little bit. Okay, the state agency must also implement safeguards to prevent overlap between meal services, to reasonably ensure children are not receiving more than the maximum allowance of SFSP meals per day at 7 CFR 225.16B3. And as you know, the maximum number of meals allowed to for children to have each day is 2. They can have any combination of meals except for lunch and supper. And then thirdly, the state agency must follow the priority system required by program regulations at 7 CFR 225.6B5 when approving applicants proposing to serve children in the same area. And we are going to see that priority system on a later slide. May a non-congregate site operate in close proximity to a congregate site that is closed, enrolled, or a camp? Under some circumstances, yes. Non-congregate meal service can potentially be provided by sites that are in close proximity to congregate service sites, such as camps or closed enrolled sites. However, state agencies must ensure that the congregate and non-congregate sites will not serve the same population of children for the same meal service on the same day. We cannot allow duplication of meals. Can existing rural sites switch from congregate to non-congregate meal service? Yes. However, the non-congregate option is not intended to replace congregate meal service. USDA understands the benefits of congregate meal service and often the accompanying activities and encourages sponsors to continue to provide these opportunities when feasible. When planning for non-congregate meal service, state agencies and sponsors should work to identify and prioritize those rural areas that the congregate SFSP cannot reliably reach. May a sponsor choose to solely operate non-congregate meal service? Yes, but only with state agency approval. May state agencies deny requests for non-congregate meal service? State agencies determine whether individual sponsors are capable of providing non-congregate meal service in rural areas in line with SFSP requirements. State agencies have the responsibility to deny sponsors that they determine are not financially or administratively capable of operating a non-congregate meal service. Proposed one or more service areas already sufficiently served through a congregate meal service, or proposed one or more service areas that do not meet the requirements for non-congregate meal service. If sponsors offer non-congregate meal service in rural areas, are they still required to follow existing SFSP program requirements? Yes. All SFSP program requirements and regulations at 7 CFR 225 and other related regulations and instructions apply to both congregate and non-congregate meal service unless otherwise specified in guidance. The next section pertains to sponsor, site, and participant eligibility. Who is eligible to participate as a sponsor operating a non-congregate meal service? Any service institution that meets the definition of sponsor in program regulations is eligible to apply to operate non-congregate meal service through their SFSP state agency. This includes, and this is the hierarchy that is listed in regulations, public and private nonprofit school food authorities, units of local, municipal, county, or state government, tribal governments, and private nonprofit organizations. What sources of data can the state agency use to establish area eligibility? State agencies can use any of the data sources outlined in Policy Memorandum SFSP 03-2017, Area Eligibility and Child Nutrition Programs, to verify that sites are located in an area eligible or in an eligible area. Data sources include school, census, or other approved sources of data that include or that indicate what sources of data are used. I'm sorry about that. Data sources include school census or other approved sources. What sources of data are used to determine eligibility for receiving non-congregate meals in non-area eligible areas? Individual eligibility for free or reduced price school meals may be determined by using individual eligibility determinations through school data or by the application process described in program regulations. Only meals served to children eligible for free or reduced price school meals may be claimed for reimbursement for non-congregate meals. 50% of the children in the site's area must be eligible for free or reduced price school meals. Are camps eligible? Camps cannot offer non-congregate meal service if congregate meal service is available. As defined in 7 CFR 225.2, camps must provide regularly scheduled food service as part of an organized program for enrolled children. Such programming is generally understood to be congregate in nature. Can a site provide a combination of non-congregate and congregate meal service? Yes. Non-congregate meal service may be provided when congregate meal service is not available. Here are a couple of examples. A site that only offers breakfast through a congregate meal service may prove to provide a lunch through non-congregate meal service. A congregate site that serves lunch and breakfast 3 days a week may be approved to provide non-congregate meals for days with no congregate service, including weekends. A congregate site that operates in the month of July may be allowed to provide non-congregate meals for the 10-day period following their last congregate meal service day provided that the days are included in the site's approved service period. The next few questions will pertain to service models. What models of non-congregate meal service are allowed? Home delivery and meal pickup options may be used for summer 2023. In many cases, non-congregate meal service may look very similar to non-congregate service implemented during COVID-19, which can serve as a reference point. State agencies opting to use these models must ensure that sponsors are able to maintain accountability and program integrity. Home delivery. This non-congregate meal service model is designed to deliver meals directly to homes. Delivery can be completed by mail or delivery service, or could be hand delivered by the sponsor's staff, volunteers, or others. Meal pickup. This non-congregate meal service model is designed to provide packaged meals that are taken home for children to eat later. Example of meal pickup include grab and go, curbside service, or take-home backpacks. Meal pickup is available to all children when the pickup site is an area-eligible area, or to children who are eligible for free or reduced price school meals when the pickup site is in an area that is not area eligible. Meals must be packaged and portioned to allow children to carry the food from the SFSP site to their home. Food safety is important for all meal service models. Sponsors should ensure food selections and packaging promote food safety. Sponsors should also include instructions on at-home storage and preparation. As with congregate SFSP meal service, sponsors must ensure non-congregate meal packages meet state and local health and safety requirements. Please note here that sanitarians must be informed of your intention to provide non-congregate meal service, and the model must meet all state and local food safety requirements. What are the requirements for initiating home meal delivery for a household? Sponsors eligible to home deliver meals are SFAs or non-SFAs with a memorandum of understanding or an MOU with an SFA to use the SFA's student data as the basis for establishing their eligible population. Sponsors that are approved to provide a non-congregate meal service using the home delivery model must be able to identify and invite households of eligible children to participate in the meal delivery service and obtain written consent from the eligible child's parent or guardian that the household wants to receive delivered meals. Written consent could include hard copy, email, or other electronic means of communication. In addition, sponsors must confirm the household's current contact information and the number of eligible children in the household to ensure the correct number of meals are delivered to the correct location. And finally, sponsors must protect their confidentiality of participants and their households throughout the process in accordance with confidentiality and disclosure provisions in the National School Lunch Act and SFSP regulations. Part 5 of the Eligibility Manual for School Meals provides specific guidance on applying the statutory and regulatory requirements and is available online. State agencies and sponsors may also refer to the Policy Memorandum SP 16, CACFP 06, SFSP 10-2016, Disclosure Requirements for Child Nutrition Programs for more information. Sponsors that are not SFAs must have MOUs on the proper handling and storage of student data with applicable SFAs that ensure consistency with the above stated confidentiality requirements. SFAs are not required to agree to enter into MOUs with requesting non-SFA sponsors. Do sponsors need signed consent forms from parents or guardians before non-congregate meals are provided to children? Yes. Consent forms are required for the home delivery model. The sponsor may provide its own consent form, or the state agency may provide a consent form for sponsors and sites to use. For other non-congregate models, such as grab and go, the standard SFSP public notification requirements are all that is needed. Do home delivery methods need to be shelf-stable, home delivered methods? Not necessarily. The type of meal offered will depend on the resources and capacity of the site. With state agency discretion, sponsors that are able to prepare ready-to-eat meals and have the capacity to deliver meals daily in a way that meets state or local food safety requirements may do so if participating households are also able to accept and safely store their meals. Sponsors should consider whether households have access to refrigeration, stoves, microwaves, etc., when providing food that requires cold storage or further preparation such as reheating. The meals must also meet the SFSP or SSO meal pattern requirements. For sponsors serving non-congregate meals via home meal delivery, should each stop, such as each home, be considered a site? No, the SFSP site requirements, including site approval by the state agency, do not apply for individual homes, school bus route stops, or mobile meal route stops. The state agency and sponsor should consider the site, the non-congregate meal service operation overall. Does the child need to be present for home meal delivery? No, the child does not need to be present at the time of delivery, as long as the sponsor has obtained the household's written consent to deliver meals and has verified the current address. If the meals are shelf stable, no one needs to be present as long as the address has been verified. There must be someone available to receive the meal if the meals or any products in the meal delivery are not shelf stable. If no one can receive the meal or meals may not be claimed. Sponsors should consider state and local food safety requirements and best practices when designing their meal service. Again, please reach out to your local sanitarian and start working with them now if this is a model that you would like to use. Is additional funding available for meal delivery? No, there is no additional federal reimbursement for home delivery or mobile meal delivery. However, expenses related to meal delivery, such as postage or delivery service fees, would be considered an allowable cost under the SFSP or SSO. Delivery costs could also be paid with non-program funds, such as state or local funds or private donations. Standard reimbursement rates linked on this slide they do remain in effect. All right, our next few slides are about meal service. Are sponsors required to follow established meal patterns when serving non-congregate meals? Yes. Just like congregate meals, non-congregate meals must comply with the current meal pattern requirements for SFSP and SSO. What are the requirements for serving non-congregate meals related to meal modifications for participants with disabilities or other medical or special dietary needs? States and sponsors are still required to provide meal modifications for participants with disabilities when serving non-congregate meals. When planning a non-congregate meal service, state agencies and program operators should consider how individuals who require meal modifications will be identified and served appropriately. Individual substitutions may also be made at a sponsor's discretion for a child with a non-disability medical or other special dietary need. Households should have a way of notifying the sponsor of the need for individual substitutions due to medical or other special dietary needs. Can offer versus serve, or OVS, be used in a non-congregate setting? The state agency will not be allowing offer versus serve in the non-congregate setting. And please be reminded that in traditional congregate meal settings, only school food authorities or those sponsors that participate in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast program during the school year will be allowed to utilize Offer versus Serve this summer, and they will only be able to do so in the congregate meal setting. What are the requirements related to site caps for non-congregate meal service in rural areas? The site cap is established for all sites during the application and approval process. When evaluating a proposed food service site, the state agency must ensure that sites have adequate facilities and capacity to prepare and/or distribute meals for the number of children they are approved to serve. For non-congregate meal sites, site caps must be set to ensure that only one meal per child per meal service is prepared and distributed. Site caps may be adjusted and approved by the state agency as necessary. Please be reminded that site caps, after initial approval, must not be implemented until the state agency has approved the request. The state agency will be conducting site visits on requested site cap increases. How many meals per child may be provided through non-congregate meal service? The maximum number of meals that may be offered at a non-congregate site and a congregate site is the same. Up to 2 meals or 1 meal and 1 snack per child per day may be offered in any combination except lunch and supper. The state agency may, at its discretion, approve sponsors for multi-day distribution of meals for the allowable number of reimbursable meals that would be provided over a 5-day calendar period. Weekend meal delivery will not be permitted due to the state agency's inability to provide adequate oversight and technical assistance to those programs during weekends. The 5-day maximum is in place based on demonstrated best practices and responsibility and services for SFSP over the past pandemic years. It also addresses typical safe holding of food under refrigeration after a package is open, which is typically less than 7 days. Quality definitely starts to suffer after 5 days of holding in refrigeration. This also addresses milk and the limited refrigeration life, space for holding in the refrigerator, and the ability for families to safely hold milk for consumption. In terms of cost and quality, shelf-stable milk can be expensive, and children often shy away from drinking it. It also addresses the amount of food that can be reasonably held in a home refrigerator. So let's take a look at some examples of multi-day issuance. In this scenario, the sponsor decides to provide 5 days worth of breakfasts and lunches every Monday. Please note that the sponsor will be required to provide the menu in the meal box to the family so that the family can easily understand what is intended to be consumed for each reimbursable meal claimed. In this scenario, the issuance on Monday will cover Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. In this scenario, the sponsor wants to provide meals 7 days per week. In order to comply with the 5-day max and not issuing on weekends, the sponsor could offer a 4-day issuance and a 3-day issuance as pictured on this slide. This would result in this image, we are trying to prevent the duplication of meals by only providing a 4-day box and a 3-day box per week. Now, in this example, the sponsor is offering a hybrid congregate, non-congregate model. The sponsor offers congregate meal service each week from Monday to Thursday. The sponsor sends home 3 days worth of meals on Fridays to cover Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. In the CNP claim system, in the CNP system, Claim system. All meals will be claimed on the days intended for consumption. We will also note here that congregate and non-congregate meal sites will be created separately within the C&P system. This is due to the congressional requirement that we track all congregate and non-congregate meals separately, and due to the potential difference in reimbursement rates. Are second meals reimbursable for non-congregate meal service? No. Sponsors may only claim one meal per child per meal service for non-congregate meal service. Do the meal service time requirements in SFSP apply to non-congregate meal service? Some meal service time requirements continue to apply. Per program regulations at 7 CFR 225.16C, meal service times still need to be established for each site, included in the sponsor's application, and approved by the state agency. These requirements may be met through state agency approved pickup schedules or delivery plans with designated times for distribution. So for example, if lunch and snack are issued from 12 to 1 p.m., the online application must list 12 to 1 p.m. for both the lunch and snack calendars. The state agency must approve any changes to the meal service time. Sponsors offering non-congregate meal service are not required to serve breakfast in the morning or allow 1 hour between the end of one meal service and the start of the next. They can be issued simultaneously. Can meals be distributed to parents or guardians at non-congregate pickup locations? Yes, sponsors that have been approved to operate non-congregate meal service in rural areas may distribute meals to parents or guardians to take home to their children. Sponsors opting to distribute meals to parents or guardians must maintain accountability and program integrity. This includes processes to ensure that meals are only distributed to parents or guardians of eligible children and that duplicate meals are not distributed to any child. We anticipate utilizing parent-guardian meal pickup forms as implemented during COVID. And our last section covers general questions about non-congregate feeding. Are sponsors required to announce the availability of non-congregate meals? Yes, annual announcements are required. Sponsors of congregate and non-congregate sites must announce the availability of free meals in the local media. Sponsors should include the announcement of the days of delivery and pickup when providing non-congregate meal service in rural areas. And our very last question is, do sponsors need to display the "And Justice for All" posters at pickup sites and for home delivery transportation? The "And Justice for All" poster must be prominently displayed, such as in a window, on all vehicles making door-to-door drop deliveries at homes, and in all pickup facilities and locations providing non-congregate meal service in rural areas. State agencies and sponsors must ensure that outreach strategies and meal service does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, age, disability, or sex. Please contact the state agency if you are in need of posters. We do have some available, and if we do not, then they may be printed. All right, that was a lot of information to take in. Like I said at the beginning of the training, we will be sending this to the Louisiana Fit Kids to post within 48 hours. Please send your questions to childnutritionprograms@la.gov if they weren't answered today. We will be hosting additional trainings and are available for technical assistance via phone or in person by request. We are still developing what the questions are going to be on the online application in terms of non-congregate feeding. That is still in development. And so hang with us, and we're anticipating that we're going to open the website sometime in April. And there will be some major changes, especially when it comes to some of these final rule determinations, and non-congregate options. All right, so I'm going to take a look at our questions. Can SFAs, okay, hold on. Can teenagers in high school pick up their own meals? Yes. Can a non-congregate option be discussed with the state agency beforehand to determine a sponsor's eligibility? Absolutely. Please, if you have any questions about if you're going to be eligible, please reach out to the state agency so we can discuss. Can SFAs use program funds to pay for buses to pick up children to bring to schools for summer lunch at a school site? That is an allowable cost. So yes, you can use program funds for that. That would be allowable. What is the difference between SSO and SFSP? There are quite a few differences. SSO is basically like continuing your NSLP meal service into the summer. You get the same reimbursement rate. You're following the same meal pattern. You're doing vegetable subgroups and whole grains, and all the requirements exist there. SFSP is going to have a more rigorous application process. There's going to be more monitoring involved. The meal pattern is different, although you can continue to follow the NSLP meal pattern. There's quite a few differences. If you need to talk in depth, please reach out to the state agency and maybe we can schedule time for a phone call. So we are still waiting. We have a question about the And Justice for All posters. We actually are still waiting for them to update the And Justice for All posters, which clarifies sex to include sexual orientation and gender identity. Those have not been printed just yet, but we do have some that have been approved for posting. We have some here in the office, not a ton of posters, but we do have some. So if you need some, email us at thatchildnutritionprograms@la.gov. Tell us how many you need and what address you need them sent to. Again, for specifics on the SSO and SFSP meal pattern, reach out to us and we can provide that via email. For our online application, we are anticipating the SFSP application to open in April. We are going to have to work through some logistics on the Seamless Summer side as well, because obviously we are going to have to make some modifications and determine how we're going to capture non-congregate meal service there as well. So try to be patient with us as we're processing through all this new information from USDA. We have a question from a school district related to, can they operate non-congregate meals at the schools that are not participating in congregate feeding? I'm going to give you a probably. I'm going to give you a probably for that. We may have to look at like distance between schools and the population that you're capturing and some very specific information. I'm going to say that is probably an option. And you would be able to tell if you were having duplication of meals due to who you have enrolled or eating at your congregate site versus who is receiving deliveries or grab and go or that sort of thing. USDA has not provided specific guidance on distance. We unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, don't have like a perimeter or like a mileage that we're looking at for distance. But I'm going to say it would probably be allowable, especially since you're going to have the ability to track student by student who's eating at your congregate site versus who would have access at non-congregate sites. What other questions do we have? These are all good questions. Okay. Well, I'm so thankful to all of you for joining today. Oh, when is the SFSP application open and when is it due? It is opening sometime in April. It's going to depend a little bit on how quickly our programmers can incorporate everything we need to incorporate for non-congregate feeding, but it will be sometime in April. It is due, and this is a good question, and I do want to emphasize this here. You should have your applications turned into us 2 weeks prior to the start of operations to give us adequate time to process. If we do not have your application within 2 weeks prior to beginning operation, you will not be able to claim until the application has been approved, which means we may be removing dates from your operating calendar. So it does need to be submitted to us 2 weeks prior to when you're going to start operations, in order to give us adequate time to process. And the same, I'll just throw out another reminder here. You do need to have your permit to operate. Operations cannot begin, cannot be claimed until you have a current permit to operate as well. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining today. We do have several more summer trainings coming up. I said it in the beginning, and if you hopped on late, that training that we were hoping to do on Thursday for returning sponsors has been moved to the following Tuesday, March 28th. It's from 1 to 3:30. So please go to louisianafitkids.com and register for that. It's going to give a broad overview of the summer, and general reminders separate just from the final rule and non-congregate feeding that were discussed today. So yeah, thanks again for joining. We appreciate your time and everything you do for your communities, and we're excited to work with all of you this summer.